Welcome, everyone, to By the People, a weekly podcast focusing on all things government and politics. In this episode, we'll be focusing on a recent hot topic, executive orders. We're your hosts, Kai Snack,
Notorious Big B.
Snoop Cat.
And Dr. Full Respect.
and we're excited to present today's episode.
Okay, so right off the bat, I just want to start off with something I saw on the news yesterday. I was watching Telemundo and I saw something about Trump trying to take birthright citizenships, but I'm just confused because isn't birthright citizenship a constitutional amendment?
Yeah, that's definitely a really controversial thing that's happened with the current administration, where Trump is kind of challenging the decades of precedent we have around birthright citizenship, which is why a lot of states have actually sued him in court, but we can explore that later.
Yeah, this really shows the conflict between the expanding powers of the executive branch and the state efforts to combat it.
Before we dive a little deeper into executive orders, I think we should first look at where in the Constitution the president is allowed to issue them. In Article 2, Section 3, the Constitution says, "The president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed," which essentially means that the president's job is to carry out the laws that Congress enforces, or creates.
Wait, but where does that connect to executive orders? Because aren't executive orders where the president says something and like their states are forced to follow?
Yeah. The connection is where if Congress makes a law around desegregation, the president is able to essentially say, "Hey, this part of this department, this part of the cabinet, do this," so that the states actually have to comply with the law Congress passed, rather than just ignore it.
Mm. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. I think I heard something, like I learned something in my history class about that. During the Great Depression, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he signed the executive order to get like the economy back on track. So he made like he worked with the Congress to set up a bunch of agencies like the WPA, Work Progress Administration, which provided millions of jobs to struggling Americans, and that fixed the economy. So I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Plus, FDR had to respond really quickly in that environment where Congress was a little just slow because of the natural process of making laws, and so executive orders really filled that gap.
Mm.
Yeah. Although you guys do mention good points about executive orders, most of most of FDR's executive orders were aimed at tackling pretty big prominent issues like the Great Depression during the time. However, it's important to understand not all executive orders were good or are good. Take for instance Executive Order 9066, which led to internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans just because of their ancestry, and the Supreme Court actually upheld it in the Korematsu v. United States in 1944, which showed just how the executive power can cross serious ethical guidelines. And also to mention, it shows that the role of just how other branches play into the checks and balances, like the Federalist Number 51 explains. And Congress can pass laws to limit harmful orders, and the court can rule them unconstitutional. However, there are instances like the Korematsu where, in times of crisis, these checks don't always work, which leave people exposed to vulnerabilities and bad policies.
Big B
Yeah,
makes an interesting point.
yeah. I will also say that FDR wasn't unique in signing harmful executive orders, where during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln actually signed an executive order that said if you were arrested by the government, you couldn't appeal your arrest, which means that if you were arrested, you're just cooked. And the court tried to stop him in a case called Ex parte Merryman, which said that he couldn't do that, but Lincoln just ignored it, which shows how the separation of powers doesn't always work. As Federalist One was 51 was more hopeful, but as we see, it just wasn't there in practice.
Mm.
Chat. I've been seeing some news of Trump passing all these executive orders like the 2018 Muslim ban. Trump is literally like a major signer of executive orders.
Oh, the 2018 Muslim man? Yeah, he was doing some crazy stuff. That was Executive Order 13780, I think. And basically he limited immigration from like a few Muslim countries, but the states challenged his decision because they said it violated the First Amendment because like that's going against religion. Like you can't do that in a law. But because of his wording, technicalities, it wasn't racist and it wasn't anti-Muslim. Oh, the official court case is called Trump v. Hawaii. But yeah, that's just another example, like how the three branches, they support one another, but executive orders can overrun Congress, which is like bad for the stability of our country, which Brutus one talked about.
Yeah, and another controversial order that Trump signed was about birthright citizenship, which is actually earlier this year, where he essentially as we said earlier, he redefined it to exclude children of certain parents. But a lot of states challenged, saying that he sort of violated the precedent that we have in cases like Wong Kim Ark or all the centuries of presidents since then. And so when states and other actors appealed, they were able to get universal bans, which essentially meant that no one in the country could actually enforce the order. However, they eventually appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that they couldn't really do that because uh, usually it was certain people challenging it, and universal bans are meant to provide a relief. But if you have a universal ban to just support one person, that's kind of like overdoing it. And so the court kind of stopped that, which is another example of how there's like all this disorder that executive orders can cause, but uh, certain branches can kind of step in or not step in and just let that continue violating states' rights, which is against the 10th Amendment.
Thank you. Make a good point. I think Federalist number 70 really helps explain why presidents tend to lean heavily on executive orders, especially in circumstances that can be very demanding in regards to time. Take for take for instance this Federalist paper. It argues that a strong single united executive is often necessary for better accountability and for more decisiveness. And when one person is making the calls and calling the shots, things can get done in a faster time. And laws can be enforced much more efficiently, and there's a clear line of responsibility of who is at fault or who is to give reward or praise for the executive order. That's why executive orders are so appealing during crisis or when Congress is in a state of deadlock. But as we have seen in cases like Trump's Muslim ban or the birthright citizenship executive order, that speed can also create tension with states and other branches of the government.
I like this energetic executive order thing, bro. Even though it's bad with Trump, like it sounds pretty good on paper. Like,
Right, but I think part of the issue is that with an example like the birthright citizenship one, that was one that kind of came out of the blue, and a lot of states had to kind of scramble and challenge it. And so that kind of like, because with birthright citizenship, that's something that's usually handled, by states when they register for like documenting a birth and whatnot. And so it's kind of like with that executive order, it's overriding the state's powers, which in turn and undermines federalism. All right, so just to summarize, we've explored both sides of executive orders where they're really helpful during dire situations like when the economy's struggling or when the country needs an urgent response. So we see good things like the Works in Progress Administration and immediate relief. But at the same time, if the wrong order is issued, then we have things like erosion of civil liberties where people can't appeal their arrests or violations of precedent, like with
Talking about
redefining birthright citizenship, which can ultimately undermine
why are you
federalism
talking to
and
me like
states'
that?
rights.
Is it so bad to think that executive orders are good overall?
I mean, your whole points just seem invalid. It seems like they don't come off from any valid rationale.
But like the entire point of executive orders is to be used in a time of crisis. Like, do you not want the crises to be solved?
Full respect. Executive orders can act fast, but the speed comes with a great cost.
That's doctor. Full respect to you.
Well, relying exclusively on executive orders for major decisions creates a fragile and temporary political landscape.
But still, there's checks and balances. The Congress can't do anything if, like, wait, when the Congress can't do anything, the president can make changes. Like, that's the whole reason they're there. Was the three branch system. The executive orders are effective because it's in check.
full respect, I don't think you understand that executive orders put pressure on the states, which must respond quickly or risk being overruled.
Oh my. Big B, how many times do I have to tell you put a doctor in front of my name?
Look, I'm just telling you, it seems like your whole ideas don't come from any rational reason.
Okay. If I can butt in here, presidents aren't always beholden to the laws of Congress. Where actually, with the Impoundment Control Act, Trump recently signed an executive order essentially saying that funds from numerous environment-related agencies had to be cut. I believe he said something specifically like that every agency involved in those other things should stop sending funding, which is in direct violation of the that Impoundment Control Act, showing how checks and balances don't always work.
But that's just for the scenario with Trump. Like Trump, like we've seen that the executive orders that he has passed have gone through, but that's more of the administration going on right now. If we look back to the Korean War during President Truman's time, we can see Executive Order 1034 when they were trying to seize the nation's steel mills, that the Congress did limit the president's power.
I
Big B,
guess
do you have anything to add? Don't include yourself where you don't belong, Snack.
Hey,
my
don't
my
disrespect Snack like that. Another example is that checks and balances often can fail, similar to Lincoln when he ignored
Oh,
the court in Ex Parliament Merryman.
right, which if I may, again shows how, with the examples of the Impoundment Control Act or Ex parte Merryman, even when the Supreme Court or the legislative passes laws to try to limit the executive's power with executive orders, the president can just ignore them because the executive is the most powerful branch. So there's no actual checks and balances at play if the president doesn't care.
that is inherently a pessimistic form of thought. You're just saying that, like, the president might not care.
Yeah, I suppose it is a pessimistic view, but what we've seen is that in really like dire situations like with Lincoln, he or Trump, they just ignore e or they just ignore things that go against their executive orders. So like yes, it's true that it's a more nihilistic view of how the separation of power works, but in practice, this is what we actually see.
But like, if we actually look at the Constitution, you guys are saying, yeah, there's separation of powers, but it's getting ignored. But like, that's still administration issues because the Constitution, it says, quote, the Constitution does not subject the lawmaking power to Congress to presidential or military supervision control. Like, that means the president doesn't have the power to do what the Congress does. The president just reinforces what the Congress says. And yes, executive orders may be like a exception, but we can't just get rid of executive orders just because there's some errors. Executive orders are still needed to make sure this nation doesn't fall into crisis.
Right, but then part of the issue is with that Truman case, the reason why, if I remember correctly, the reason why the court sided against him was that there weren't any actual laws or statutes that the president could build off of to enforce the steel seizure of mills, because the president was essentially making laws, which is why they wrote that in the decision. However, if a president doesn't mind the fact that there's no laws, they can still just go ahead and not really have anything happen against them.
I think you're just dumb. I think I think you're just not seeing the good side to executive orders. Like, they can bring so much good. Like, you already saw how they benefited the Great Depression, how they brought the workforce.
I will admit that in cases like the Great Depression, FDR did a lot of good by establishing those urgent executive orders, but there was a lot of criticism of FDR at the time because he was the longest running president and he essentially used Congress to be almost like a one-man state. But the problem with that is if you're reliant on just a single person to make decisions, that person can change a lot and be kind of bipolar. And so that means that you don't really have like a really sustainable long-term policy. And so you don't have long-term sustainable governance or
So
stability.
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting? Snack. Kai Snack. Are you suggesting we should take off executive orders? Are you suggesting we should take off the president?
No, I think that with executive orders, they do have a definite place in directing and guiding how the executive should function. But with how it currently is, a president can just issue hundreds and hundreds of executive orders, which you saw with Trump's
Yap, yap,
inauguration.
yap. Wrap it up,
And
man.
so what that means is states are overwhelmed with this deluge of executive orders that they have to address, and so states are also eroded. The lawmaking is eroded, the judiciary is eroded, and so as it currently stands, if a president really wanted to go all out, they could overrun all the other branches with executive orders, which is why we need to have at least some limit on them. What that is, well, what that would look like, I'm not sure, but
Of course, you're not sure. You're not sure of anything, Snack.
Full respect, if I may add, rapid sweeping executive orders often lead to lawsuits, injunctions, and legal confusion, which often consumes the states and the federal resources. Like, take for instance, Trump immigration and birthright citizenship executive orders have triggered multiple lawsuits and have led to temporary injunctions and often conflicting lowering courts rulings, which I don't see how you cannot see this full respect. I don't think I can continue with this podcast if you don't see this full respect.
But what you're not considering the crisis, like this, when the nation is in crisis. What about when there's security threats or there's natural disasters or there's urgent policies need to be made? How are we going to do that in an efficient form of time without executive orders? You expect it to go through all three houses? No, we need the president to take action in those scenarios.
right. But the thing is, when a president in some cases, like yes, there are some instances where there's genuine crises or concerns, like with the Great Depression. But oftentimes we see a lot of rhetoric, especially with the current administration, essentially saying that or making a mountain out of a molehill and saying that, oh, this is a big crisis, and sending things in to agitate that. And so they kind of make this small issue into something bigger, which then justifies itself. Which means that the president is able to do whatever he wants as long as he's able to have the pretext of something being wrong in the country.
But the president,
Guys, ladies, calm down. This isn't you, guys.
Snoop Cat might be right. I think we've gotten it over our heads.
Yeah, I think me, you, and Notorious Big B, we kind of we let our emotions kind of flare up there.
Might have. I think it flared up quite a bit.
You know what, Doctor? For
I
respect,
think-
I do apologize for what I said and for how I acted.
Thank you, Notorious Big B. That means a lot. I apologize for some of the things I said, although some of them might have been valid. But for
All right,
hurting
let's
your
not get ahead of
feelings.
ourselves.
Okay.
Stand your ground,
Okay, don't try
Doctor.
to start anything, baby.
Okay. Let's calm down.
What's so funny, Snap?
No,
What are
no,
you laughing for?
no. It's just I think
Say
in
sorry.
this episode, I think we had difficult conversations that need to be had where we explored the positive and negative effects of executive orders, where on one hand you have environmental and economic restoration, and on the other hand we have civil liberties kind of being eroded. And so I think the current trends that we've seen in the current administration aren't promising, but we know the history of executive orders. We know how they can be used for good, and I think that by having this conversation, in understanding the varied history of executive orders, we'll be better equipped to deal with them not only now but in the future, near and far.